The New York Giants coaches claim they make decisions in the best interest of the franchise, and yet there's one that they've been making that's a head scratcher. Locked On Giants starts right now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, you know, the Giants coaching staff, they always say to us in the media and to the fans that the decisions that they make are in the best interest of the franchise. But yet there's one decision that's just an absolute head scratcher, and it has to do with the defensive side of the ball. So we're going to talk about that first, and then in segment 2, we're going to talk about what happens if the Giants get smoked by the Philadelphia Eagles on Thursday nights. Could we potentially see changes? And if so, what changes can we expect? So I have some thoughts on that. And then finally, we're going to wrap things up with an interview that I did last week with an orthopedic surgeon who is from New York University Langone Hospital. And we talked specifically about ACL injuries. Now, the surgeon that I had on is not treating Malik Nabers, but obviously, you know, he knows a little something about ACLs and surgeries and the effect of the playing surfaces and all that good stuff. So we will wrap up the show with that interview. So again, welcome on in to everybody. Let's get into it. All right. So what's this decision that the Giants are making that's just an absolute head scratcher? And there's a lot, let's face it. All right. When a team only has one win out of, 5 games, that's a lot. Okay. So the decision I'm talking about is what they are doing at cornerback opposite of Paulson Adebo, with them rotating Cor'Dale, Flott, and Deonte Banks. Now, Cor'Dale, Flott, to my eyes, has been playing a lot better than Deonte Banks, and I have some numbers that kind of will back that up. But yet, for whatever the reason, the Giants continue to call on Deonte Banks on the money down, no less, the obvious third down, passing down, and they continue to go to him with very few results. So let me give you some stats that kind of support the idea that Cor'Dale Flott is playing a little bit better right now than Deonte Banks. Cor'Dale Flott in pass coverage has 158 defensive snaps, 4 pass breakups, 14 tackles in pass coverage. All right. Deonte Banks has played 91 snaps, a total of 91 snaps, of which 69 have come in coverage. He has 2 pass breakups, 2 tackles on pass plays, and his coverage rating right now is, according to Pro Football Focus, 154.2, whereas Flott has a 91.2 coverage rating. All right, so Flott has been better in coverage. So here's the question. Why would you have Deonte Banks out there if he is continuing to struggle in coverage on obvious passing downs? Now, I have a theory about that, which I will get to in a moment. But I wanted to look at the run, and I wanted to see if maybe that's why Deonte Banks is getting some more snaps, if you will, than he probably should. Deonte Banks has 23 snaps against the run, has logged 11 solo tackles, 2 tackles for a loss, which isn't too bad. Cor'Dale Flott against the run, 104 snaps, 12 solo tackles, no tackles for a loss. So it's almost even, almost. So here's the big question, and this was put to Shane Bowen during his conference call with the media on Monday. Does Shane Bowen have complete autonomy over how he plays guys and when he plays guys? He didn't answer the question quite exactly. It's a yes or no question, all right? He didn't give a yes or no answer. What he said was, They discuss it. They plan for the opponent. They plan to do what's best each and every week. All right. Now, that being said, if Deonte Banks is struggling, if Deonte Banks still hasn't learned at this point to turn his head around when the ball is in the air, and that he doesn't have to drag guys down to the ground, if he would just turn around and look and see what's going on, what hope is there that he is going to learn this anytime soon? All right, this is what, his third season in the NFL, and he still hasn't learned this? So why would you continue to put him out there? Well, here's my theory. Deonte Banks, as we all know, is a first-round draft pick, a guy that the Giants traded up one slot to get. The Giants want to see him because they need to make a decision at the end of this year whether or not to pick up Banks' option year. Now, with the way Banks is going, I don't see them picking that up. I mean, if it isn't obvious by now that Deonte Banks hasn't done enough to have his option year exercise after this year, then I'm not sure what it's going to take to convince this regime that this was not, that this is obvious, that he hasn't done enough. Now, this isn't to say that Banks is a total waste. There are some things he does well, and I mentioned the run defense. But here's the other problem with what the Giants are doing and why this kind of hurts the defense a little bit. If you know, as the opponent, that Deonte Banks is going to be out there on the field on obvious passing downs, all right, or what you perceive to be obvious passing downs, and you know that he struggles to defend passes, wouldn't it make sense to go after him and constantly throw at him, which is what opponents have done with a degree of success, I might add? I mean, can the Giants be any more obvious? So, if you put Cor'Dale Flott out there, and, Flott, again, has been a lot better in coverage, now it becomes maybe a pick your poison type of deal for the opponent, as opposed to, Deonte Banks is out there, easy completion, we're going to throw there. We've seen it every week since they have started this quote-unquote rotation, and it doesn't make sense. And in what lifetime is it the best interest of the team to do it this way? It doesn't. All right, if the two guys were playing equal, I'd say okay, but they're not. So why continue this? And again, the only reason I can come up with is that they are doing it because Deonte Banks is someone they want to make a firm decision on after the season. Do they pick up his option year, which right now I don't think they will, or do they move on? That's the only logical answer that I can give to this whole scenario. So that being said, when it comes to Shane Bowen, we can agree that there are times he has certain play calls and certain ideas that don't make sense. But how much of that is kind of, a result of maybe him not having total autonomy to pick the guys that he wants, that he feels will exercise the best, results? It's a fair question. Nobody from the Giants will answer it, obviously. They all sit there and they say, we've got confidence in all our guys. Yeah, okay, right. That's why you don't play some of the guys and why you play some more. So, come on. But then again, what do you expect them to say? They're not going to sit there and say, we don't have confidence in this guy to do this particular role, so we're not going to play him. So, here's where we're at. But if I'm the Giants, make a decision. Stop with this rotation. There's got to be another role that you can find for Deonte Banks if you want to get him on the field. But right now, this rotation just isn't doing anybody, in my opinion at any rate, it's not doing anybody any favors. All right, coming up next, the Giants face the Eagles Thursday Night Football. What happens if the Eagles smoke the Giants? Could we possibly see changes? And if so, what kind of changes? We'll talk about it right after this. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes, all in less than 60 seconds. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Coming up this week, Crossover Thursday. We will have Crossover Thursday with Lou DiBiase, host of Locked On Eagles. So that will be our Thursday preview. Friday, of course, we will talk about the Giants and Eagles game. A game in which the Giants are probably not going to be favored. I would be shocked if they're favored. I would not be shocked if the Giants are an underdog by a lot of points, but we'll of course see as we get a little closer. And we'll just keep rolling right along here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And, speaking of the Eagles game that's coming up, would the Giants, if they get smoked by the Eagles, would the Giants make any changes in terms of the coaching staff, in terms of the front office, in terms of anything? Here's my take on this. I do not think the Giants are going to get rid of Joe Schoen if they get smoked by the Eagles. Joe Schoen's going to finish out the year. All right? At this point, let him finish out the year. There's still some cap work that needs to be done. The Giants, again, as I record this, last in the league in total cap space. They've got some moves that they need to make, and I believe the cap is the reason why the Giants did not fill the 2 spots on the 53-man roster that they had open, last week. What about the coaching staff? I think Brian Daboll is going to be safe if the Eagles smoke the Giants. All right. Now, I know some of you are like, just clean house, get it over with. The season's lost. I don't see that happening. Brian Daboll right now is clinging to a life raft. And that life raft, as we all know, is named Jackson Dart. So I don't see ownership giving Daboll the boot. That said, the guy who I think is most likely to get the boot if changes are made, Shane Bowen. Now, whether you agree that he deserves it or not, here's the situation. Bowen was given a lot of talent on the back end, up front, on the pass rush. That defense should theoretically be a top 15, if not a top 10 defense. That has not happened. All right. So you look at the Giants defense, and really there's been one game that you can honestly say where the back end of the defense and the front end of the defense were on the same page. And that one game was against the Los Angeles Chargers. Last week, the Giants were getting pressure on Spencer Rattler of the New Orleans Saints, but no sacks and only 1 quarterback hit to speak of. Not good enough. Okay? Now, you can say that the reason why the Giants weren't as successful is because Rattler was getting the ball out of his hands quickly. But you know what? All teams have been doing that against the Giants. That's not something new. That's not something that the Saints decided to do for the first time against the Giants this year. The problem has been in the back end of the defense. And I spoke, about the cornerback situation in the first segment. But the back end of the defense, when was the last time you can honestly say they made a stellar game-changing play? If anything, the fundamentals have been off, all right? You've seen Deonte Banks get grabby. You've seen Drew Phillips get grabby. Where are the fundamentals? Why is this still a problem? Now we're going in six weeks into the season. Why is this still a problem? You would think at this point everybody would be in mid-season form. There's no consistency back there. And it's affecting everything. Now the good thing you can say is the run defense last week was better. The Giants only allowed 88 yards against the Saints First time all year that they allowed an opponent under 100 yards. All right. But the defense is disjointed. And I think if you're going to make a change, and I don't know for sure that this will happen, obviously we have to see how bad, the game turns out for the Giants, or who knows, maybe the Giants will upset the Eagles. Stranger things have happened, right? But I think Bowen is the guy you look at in terms of if they make a change, he's going to be probably number one on the list at this time. Now, some of you have said, okay, well, if they do make that change, who takes over as defensive coordinator? Andre Patterson, the defensive line coach, comes to mind. But to be honest with you, do they really want to pull him off of his current duties when he's working to get Darius Alexander up to snuff? I don't know. I don't think so. Could they maybe make it a by committee type of deal? Could they bring in a consultant to help with the game planning? I don't know what the answer would be. But in terms of who is most likely to get the boot, if the Giants continue to slide down the drain, I think Bowen's going to be the first guy to go. It's not going to be Michael Gabriel, the special teams coordinator, who has done a really good job. I've spoken about that before, that the Giants special teams unit is actually a strength right now. This team gets overlooked because of the problems up on offense and defense, but that special teams unit has, for the most part, been a strength. Mike Kafka's not going anywhere either. Okay, so that leaves Shane Bowen as the most likely candidate if the Giants get smoked by the Eagles and if the Giants feel that it is necessary to make a change. Now, it's all going to depend. Again, if Bowen's defense holds the Eagles and the Giants still lose because they turn the ball over a gazillion times like they did last week, you can't justify, in my opinion, firing Bowen. But at some point, you wonder if a change is made to shake things up, is he going to be the guy? And I think he will be, whether you agree that he deserves it or he doesn't. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to hear from Dr. Michael Alaia, who is an orthopedic surgeon for New York University Langone. We talked about ACL surgeries, the effect on turf, the timeline, all that good stuff regarding ACL injuries, which, as we all know, Malik Nabers is getting ready to have surgery this week. Now, Dr. Alaia did not treat Malik Nabers, but he came on to give us his expert opinion. So I'll have that interview for you coming up right after this. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else as of August 2025. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up in this segment, we're going to hear from Dr. Michael Alaia of New York University Langone Health, who is an orthopedic surgeon. And he came on to talk a little bit about ACL injuries in general, the surgery, the recovery. We talked a little bit about, the effect of the turf, whether a full tear is better than a partial tear and all that good stuff. Now, before I run the interview, it's important that you note Dr. Alaia has not treated Malik Nabers, who is due to have surgery this week, according to reports. Dr. Alaia has not examined Malik Nabers. He is not performing the surgery. He came on to give his general opinions based on his experience and answer maybe some questions that exist out there regarding ACLs and ACL surgery. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and cue up that interview. I am joined today by Dr. Michael Alaia, who is a sports orthopedic surgeon, shoulder and elbow surgery. He is with New York University Langone, and he is here to talk about Malik Nabers' ACL injury. Now, before we jump in, Dr. Alaia has not treated Malik Nabers. The information provided in this interview is strictly his professional opinions and based on his experience in the field. Dr. Alaia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
All right, I guess let's start with the basics. Why is an ACL tear amongst the most common knee injuries that we see in athletes as opposed to the MCL, the meniscus, and the PCL?
So meniscus tears, MCL tears are still very, very common in our typical athletic population. PCL is less so. But the ACL is very important in controlling rotational stability of the knee, meaning your ability to cut, pivot, change directions rapidly. The knee relies on the ACL to keep the shin bone located underneath the thigh bone when you're rapidly changing directions. So for football players, soccer players, basketball players that are doing high velocity pivoting, skiers, for example, that ACL becomes pivotal in order to keep the knee centered, controlled, and prevent other structures inside the knee from being damaged as well.
So I guess that's why we see a lot of these injuries with the skill position players in football, guys that are stopping and cutting.
Yeah, guys and gals that are running really fast, rapidly changing directions, coming down from awkward lands. Very, very common to see these.
Is there generally a precursor to an ACL injury, such as like a sprained knee or, maybe I think it's hyperextension or anything like that?
Often not. We rarely ever see that. Most of the times these are initial injuries. Now, sometimes an ACL can tear again over time, whether it be from another contact injury or a non-contact injury. But most of the time this happens on a freak occurrence, and there really is no precursor to it.
So you mentioned contact injuries versus non-contact injuries. Is one typically more, I guess, significant than the other, or is it just kind of, for lack of a better term, luck of the draw?
Yeah, I would say the majority of ACL injuries that we see in patients, whether it be elite athletes or non-elite athletes, sustain non-contact injuries when they tear the ACL. Again, it's that rapid pivoting and cutting. Occasionally, somebody might take a hit to the outside of the knee that drives their knee into a position that it doesn't want to be in. And if that's the case, then certainly you could tear the ACL and the MCL at the same time, or even vice versa. If somebody drives into the inside of someone's knee and pushes it kind of outward, then they can tear the ACL with the LCL and things like that.
Is it possible to avoid these injuries by strengthening the area, the muscles and so forth around it?
It's not going to significantly change it. I mean, we always talk about neuromuscular control and prevention and ACL prevention programs, which are effective in their own right. However, it's not going to 100% guarantee that these patients, these players are not going to sustain this injury. I think it's helpful for athletes to know what their boundaries are. I think it's helpful for athletes to know where their legs are with regard to space and time, landing mechanics, whether they're going to come down awkwardly. But a majority of the time that you might see in a football tackle, somebody's getting dragged to the ground and they simply don't have control of where their leg is going to land. It lands where it is, and it's the body's natural response to try and innately protect it and stop where they're going.
Given how far medicine has come these days with surgery and whatnot, can you just kind of give us an overview of what the next steps are? The injury has obviously, it took place last Sunday. So I believe there's obviously swelling in the area that probably has to go down. But what are the next steps as far as getting the knee ready for surgery?
Yes. So, I'm not going to speak particularly about Malik Nabers' injury because I'm not his treating surgeon. So the people that are treating him are obviously experts in the field and they have an exact plan for him. But I'll speak in terms of ACL generalities. Most of the time, what we do is we wait for the knee to calm down a little bit. Basically, the fluid should be out of the knee. Any kind of blood that forms inside the knee from the injury, the body should have the chance to resorb that. We also want to work on patient strengthening. We want to make sure their quadriceps are firing appropriately and they have good core strength. And the last thing that we look for is that patients have full painless range of motion. So when I do an ACL reconstruction on a patient, I prefer to go in and do it when the knee is biologically quiet, meaning that they don't have pain, they've got excellent motion, they have excellent quadriceps strength, and the ability to activate themselves. Now, unfortunately, not all the times we're under that privilege to have it, but in the majority of times, we are able to have a timeline. And as soon as they hit the timeline and all the parameters through that, then we usually go in and do the procedure.
With everybody being different, though, I mean, some people, I guess the swelling can go down within a matter of days. Some people it could take weeks. So do you have like a cutoff date where you say, okay, we've got to go in and we've got to fix this?
No, we don't have a cutoff date. Generally speaking, we recommend doing it usually within the first 3 months, simply to avoid recurrent injury to the knee. But we see lots of patients in our offices that are 6 months after the injury, 9 months after the injury, and they haven't even known that they sustained an ACL tear, or they've been putting it off for one reason or another. So, we prefer to go in when we can, as long as the knee permits us to do that. But there's probably no difference between 2 weeks and 4 weeks or 4 weeks and 5 weeks, unless we're talking about a really, really young athlete who's like 10 or 12 years old. Then time might be a little bit more of an important factor that we look at, because those patients tend to hurt themselves more often after the initial tear. But in somebody like him, or anybody per se, we wait for the knee to quiet down a little bit.
Usually it's been said that when you're younger, you can bounce back from injuries a lot quicker. Malik Nabers, he's in his early 20s. That being said, you had mentioned also before that sometimes, if you have reconstructive knee surgery on the ACL, you can tear it again. So is it better, I say this because an ACL injury is not, a good thing to have, but is it generally more encouraging, I guess I should say, to have it at a younger age as opposed to, say, an older age?
I'm not certain. I think that generally speaking, for elite athletes, tearing the ACL is never something that we would like to have, because these patients and these players are putting substantial amount of stress through their knee. So they're always going to be our higher risk patients for tearing it again, as opposed to somebody like me, who, for example, who's simply just a recreational athlete. If I tear my ACL and I have it taken care of, then the odds are very, very high that nothing is going to happen to my knee again, because either I'll cut down on things that I want to do, or perhaps change my activities, or simply the fact that I'm not that elite of an athlete at this point. So my risk is going to be very, very small of tearing it again. So I don't think age being younger is a positive prognostic factor. If anything, it might be more of a negative prognostic factor, simply because they have many, many more years left of elite athletics, as opposed to somebody like me who's 43 and not an elite athlete to begin with.
Right. Now, we've seen stories about guys who have partial tears versus full tears. And I think it's been said, and you can verify this for us if you would, it's better to have a clean full tear than a partial tear. Is that correct?
No, I don't think that's correct either. I think that a lot of things depend on what the clinical examination is. A lot of partial tears can do fine without surgery. So if somebody tears their ACL and it's just a small amount of the ACL that's torn, which is not all too common, but to have a partial tear, a lot of people can live with a partial tear and not really have to modify their activities. Their knee feels stable on them. They can pivot, they can cut, they can do everything that they want to do, and they don't have any sensations of instability or pain or issues like that. A complete tear of the ACL, more often than not, renders the knee to be unstable. So if you're pivoting, you feel the knee give or buckle underneath you, and that's when more injuries can actually happen. So I would say it's worse to have a full tear than a partial tear. So, I mean, if I only tore 2/10 of my ACL, I would say there's a very significant certainty that I wouldn't have to have any surgery on it. But a full tear renders the knee a little bit more unstable. So those patients tend to benefit more from surgery. Now, ACL surgery is certainly not mandatory. You're not going to die without an ACL. This is not heart disease. This is not cancer, et cetera. But there are certain things that, the ACL is beneficial for: cutting, pivoting, sports, skiing, et cetera. So patients have to weigh their options. They have to weigh the risks and benefits, as well as the rehabilitation process afterwards, and then decide whether or not they think it's right for them.
I'm assuming again here that if you have a partial tear, like a slight tear, that's not going to repair itself. It's not like blood's going to get into the area to help repair it. Is that correct?
Some tears can heal on their own if it's a small tear in a certain area of the ACL. But again, that doesn't really so much matter what the MRI shows. So if we get an MRI after a partial tear and it shows healing, or maybe not so much healing, it's not all that relevant. What is really most relevant is what the knee feels like. Is the patient having symptoms? So if the patient has no instability and they have no symptoms, then the MRI is almost irrelevant, because they're living a full functional life without any significant detriment.
This has been a hot topic, and that's the turf and the turf's role on the knee and the joints in general, Achilles included. What's your thought on, does the grass significantly reduce, you think, the risk of an injury? Is the turf more of a detriment?
So there are certainly some studies that say that a turf is a little bit more of a detriment, and there are pros and cons to having turf as opposed to grass, and pros and cons of having grass as opposed to turf. Um, you're not going to completely eliminate the risk of having an ACL tear just by playing on grass. So we always like to blame something. So in this case, in scenario where let's say, oh, the turf is the problem. He wouldn't have tore his ACL, or I wouldn't have torn my ACL if he wasn't, or I wasn't playing on turf. That's not the case. Lots of ACL tears happen on grass. Tons of ACL tears happen on grass every day on the soccer field or on a baseball field. Those are not astroturf for the most part. So the injuries still happen with grass. The reason why turf might have a slightly higher chance of a knee injury is because what ultimately happens is the cleats can get caught a little bit more in the turf. It's almost like having a skis binds, that the bindings don't come off when you twist it. So everything kind of twists as a unit. So if that cleat can't give and come off, then perhaps the leg will get stuck down as it's pivoting, as it's twisting. And that's when the injury happens.
Now, again, every patient's different, but can you give us a general timeline for an athlete when he can expect to lose the crutches, start jogging, start running, and so forth?
Well, a lot of it happens to do with the quality of other structures inside the knee as well, whether or not the meniscus needs to be actually fixed and repaired with sutures. I would say the great majority of our patients that we treat can start weight bearing initially after the surgery, as long as the meniscus doesn't have to get fixed. They can weight bear to tolerance as soon as they are comfortable doing so. They might need crutches for a week or two just for comfort. And then we tend to get them involved in physical therapy almost immediately after the surgery, because the sooner they rehabilitate functionally, the faster their functional recovery is going to be as well. So we want to keep their quadriceps activated. We want to keep the swelling to a minimum. Any professional athlete is going to have the access to the best possible physical therapy and athletic trainers and care, but your average Joe doesn't typically have that. But we try our best to get them to where they need to be, and we're often very, very successful in doing that. I would say exercise bike happens very quickly within 2 to 3 weeks after, sometimes even sooner. The crutches usually can be ditched within 2 to 4 weeks just for comfort. Patients often will wear a brace afterwards for protection, but it's not entirely mandatory. Some people don't brace athletes at all or patients at all after ACL surgery. And over the long term, patients and athletes have to hit certain parameters in terms of their strength before they're allowed to go back to certain activities like pivoting. Because what we don't want to do is have another injury. So if they go back too soon and their muscles aren't strong, then perhaps they can tear through their ligament again because their muscles aren't providing them the adequate protection that they need.
In terms of long-term recovery, I mean, there have been instances where athletes have come back and they've been better and faster and more stable. You look at Adrian Peterson at the NFL. He's a perfect example. Saquon Barkley, who had an ACL a few years ago. Typically, is there I don't want to say a grace period, but it's been said that an athlete can't really get back to what he was until about 18 to 24 months after the surgery. Is that, in your estimation, a pretty good timeline, or has medicine advanced where it's now quicker?
I don't think medicine is advanced, unfortunately. I'd love to say that it has, but there are multiple factors that go into ACL rehabilitation. Number one is the healing of the graft that you use. You want to make sure that's as mature as possible, and only time helps that. And then finally, muscle strength as well, the ability to cut, jump, control where you're landing. I mean, Adrian Peterson came back, after 6 months or something like that, and had a career year. But that's not every athlete, and not everybody has access to the same quality of care as an NFL player does. So I would say the majority of patients go back to sport within 6 to 12 months after a procedure like this. But yes, there are more and more thoughts amongst thought leaders saying that, it might actually be 18 to 24 months to hit maximum potential.
So that would be more of a conservative estimate, in your opinion.
I mean, I think so.
Okay. And then finally, a big question is, can Malik Nabers be the same, the same quickness, the same everything post-surgery? I know everybody is different. It's going to depend on his rehab and whatnot, but in your experience, whatever, athletes, regular people, how close do they actually get back to being their pre-surgery self?
Yeah. So, I can't comment on Malik Nabers actually because I don't know what the extent of the injuries is, and I'm not the physician that's treating him. So I think that my hope, obviously, and the hope of every New York Giants fan out there is that he's going to be coming back even better than what he was before, which was an outstanding football player and an outstanding wide receiver. So, I think that the hope is there, and we're going to take whatever information is given to us and hopefully extrapolate that for what it is. But, I think the physicians that are treating him are going to do an amazing job, as they probably do with every ACL that they treat, and hopefully bigger, stronger, faster.
Dr. Alaia, thank you so much for coming on, giving us some of your professional insight. He's Dr. Michael Alaia, sports orthopedic surgeon, shoulder and elbow surgery at New York University Langone. All right, Giant fans, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Michael Alaia of NYU Langone Health. It's certainly informative, I thought, especially the part about the turf. So I hope you enjoyed that as well. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. And as always, we thank you for making Locked On Giants part of your day, or if you made us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. The NFL season is finally here, so for your next listen, get a double dose of Locked On NFL podcasts. Tyler the Madman Rowland gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day, while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, we will see you tomorrow with an all-new episode of Locked On Giants. Have a good one until then.